Our liberties we prize, and our rights we will maintain. This is Iowa Civil Rights History Podcast, where we tell stories about the contribution Iowans and the state of Iowa has made to advance the civil rights movement. Past stories are being told, present actions will be highlighted, and preparation for the future will be discussed. Here is your host, Erica Nganyange.
Welcome to the Iowa Civil Rights History Podcast. Back to our conversation on wrongful conviction. On October 8, 1980, a man named William Beeman from Muscatine, Iowa, was sentenced to life in prison for the killing of Michele Winkel. His lawyer, who is here today, Erica Nichols Cook, who is also the director of the Iowa Division of Wrongful Conviction, strongly believes our client was wrongfully charged and convicted of the crime he did not commit. In this episode, Erica goes into detail discussing about the case and why she believes Mr. Beeman is innocent of the crime. Now, Erica, let's get to this case. William Beeman. This guy was sentenced in October 8th, 1980.
Yes.
Who is he? Talk about this guy.
So he likes to go by Bill. Bill Beeman grew up in Muscatine. He left high school early to go to the Job Corps in Rapid City, South Dakota. And then he came back to Muscatine. His dad had worked for the local utility companies, and he had a couple sisters, and his mom still lives in Muscatine. He liked to ride motorcycles, and he worked as a DJ. It was, I don't know if it's a 1980s reference, but it was like a Baker's Front Street disco. So I like to imagine what that looked like, in 1979, 1980. In April of 1980, a young woman, Michele Winkel, went missing from her family's home. Her family did not report her missing, but they last reported seeing her April 21st, 1980. Her body was found on Saturday, April 26th in Wildcat Den State Park. She had been stabbed. She had been strangled. She had a large wound to her right eye, head, and she was naked except for socks. So, the hunt was on. In Muscatine County for who did this. Winkel's dad taught pathology at the University of Iowa in Iowa City. Catholic family, several sisters, several brothers. Michele seemed to have been, a mystery. When we started reading Bill's transcripts, our first grant was looking at cases where they'd used hair evidence, what they call microscopic hair comparison, and we're making matches that DNA now could disprove. There's some famous cases out of D.C. where the analyst had said that the hair on the victim was from the defendant, but when they did DNA testing 20, 30 years later, it was actually dog hair, not the defendant's hair.
It's hard to make this stuff up.
Yeah, truth is stranger than fiction sometimes. So that was kind of the catalyst for that grant project. In Bill's case, they never really matched hair to him. Yet we were really intrigued by the case because the evidence against him was his own confession that he'd picked her up on his motorcycle. They'd gone to the Wildcat Den State Park. They were making out.
They knew each other.
Well, that's what his statement says. And that's basically what he's convicted on. Oh, wow. And at trial, his defense attorneys, who had never tried a felony case before, this was their first felony trial, let alone a murder trial.
Was he a public defender?
No.
Private attorney?
There wasn't a public defender system in 1980. So
did not know that.
The statewide system didn't come into effect until later, but you always had the right to the state to pay your attorney. Yeah. And so the court would appoint attorneys. And eventually the attorneys got paid by the state, but the family had a little bit of money, so they hired someone they knew. He'd done a work comp for them before. So Bill gets arrested. His mom calls the only attorney she knows.
So how did the police even
get to Bill? They had no leads, really, right? She'd been seen leaving the Canterbury Inn and Spa where she liked to swim and talking to the front desk clerk. She'd been picked up by a man in a car. And so that's kind of, they were looking for places she might have gone, people she would have seen. And they started interviewing people, and they said she'd been at this disco where Bill was a DJ. They started interviewing everybody that worked there, people that worked at the spa, and where she'd worked at Hardee's, interviewing those people. Bill's girlfriend gave him an alibi for every night except for Monday the 21st. She couldn't remember because his birthday is Tuesday, April 22nd, and they had a party for him at the bar, and he broke his foot that night horsing around with his sister.
On the 21st?
On the 22nd.
22nd.
So the day after she is last seen at the spa. So Joyce just doesn't, she's like, I don't remember. I think he came home Monday night. He doesn't work on Mondays. Like, she was confused.
Yeah.
And so he didn't have an alibi. So they brought him back in for questioning. And
oh boy.
The DCI agent asks Bill questions, and the sheriff's deputy types up a statement, and then they have him sign it. And the statement reads like, I did this. I did that. It's a narrative form, but it's not building and give a narrative statement. So they had that at trial, and what they called knife swipe mark comparison. There was marks on Michele's stomach and blood that they said were the outline of a knife. And that they then took, when they arrested Bill, they took the knives that he had in his pocket, and the lab then dipped it in blood and did an experiment on some lab personnel's stomachs to see if it matched. But it was an average, common pocket knife that lots of people have. Skin is not a great material to withhold, patterns. We've learned that in bite mark cases, that skin moves, it changes, it as the body, when you die, your body starts to decompose and it changes, right?
Yeah.
And ashes to ashes, if you think about that. So, but that's really what they had. There was no blood on Beeman's clothing, his motorcycle. He didn't even own a brown car that she was seen picked up in. He thought maybe he'd seen her once at Hardee's or maybe once at the bar. He never talked to her. But because of his statement, he's convicted. He's arrested May 8th. So, like less than 2 weeks after she's found.
She's found. And 5 months later, he was convicted and sentenced. Why did he make confession?
So he doesn't remember. He says that he was on some meds for his broken foot, and he's always had chronic migraines and been on medicine for those. He testified at trial. They were harsh with him, that they told him he was lying, that he didn't have an alibi. Nah. Things like that. The research around false confessions is so much more robust, right? I was just listening to IPR, and they're talking about a new study about how sleep deprivation leads to false confessions. Because they did not do a video of the interrogation or even audio, it's really hard to review it and see what techniques or tactics they were using. We know the Reed technique leads to false confessions. That's been proven over and over again in Chicago, in New York with the big DNA exonerations. We know that from Brendan Dassey, right? In Making a Murderer, where we have video of how they interrogate. We don't have video in Bill's case, so we're never going to know exactly what happened in that room.
Did he have any criminal background before this?
Like one theft. He was only 23. We decided that we were going to ask for DNA testing. The lab reports that we got, talking about the hair and what was collected at the scene, they collected hair, but they never matched it to Mr. Beeman from the victim. But there was a sexual assault kit collected. And
because she was raped.
Well, we don't know for sure. They say she was. But the swabs had semen on them. So we're like, perfect.
Yeah.
Let's find out whose that is. If it's Beeman's, I close the file. Mm-hmm. If it's not, we've got some more work to do. Yeah. While we filed our motion, the clerk's office had a box of evidence. They have the knife in there. The judge asked us, why don't you want to test the knife? I said, because DCI dipped it into some unknown blood and did experiments with it. So what's it going to tell me? Nothing. Yeah. I want the sex assault kit or the victim's clothing. Nobody can find it. It's gone. Muscatine County Sheriff has no evidence retention policies. The whole county doesn't. The judge ordered that they let us into the evidence room and look. There are no boxes marked Beeman. There's boxes from 1979, boxes from 1985, nothing from 1980. No copies of reports, no copies of depots.
You think that on purpose?
Yes. You can't tell me it's a policy after so many years to get rid of it when you have a case from 1979 where the client got life without parole as well, and you haven't destroyed it. So it's not a policy. There's a reason you got rid of Beeman and you can't find it. So in that process, though, the court also ordered that we have access to the DCI file.
What is the DCI?
Department of Criminal Investigation, basically Iowa State Police. And so we got 800 pages right before Christmas last year. It was shocking where you couldn't stop reading. Like after dinner, kids are in bed, and I'm back reading this PDF file because I cannot believe it. They are about 7 more witnesses who saw her alive after the April 21st when my client supposedly killed her that they never told anybody about. There are alternate suspects.
So I'm assuming they did not share this information with defense lawyer.
That was our claim, and that was our argument. We deposed and put on the trial attorneys who no longer had a file. They gave some of it to the Beeman family, and then they had a fire in their office. And you're not, as an attorney, you're not required to keep your file for any certain amount of time. The file belongs to the client, but if your client's in prison, they probably can't have it or don't want that confidential information in prison. So that's another policy issue, right? Like, yeah. What should you do with your file when your client gets life? They claimed and they testified, right, that if they had known this information, it fit with their theory. Because at trial, they put on a witness who said she saw Michele Winkel, the victim, at the mall 2 days after my client supposedly killed her. And if you'd been able to put on like 11 people who saw her after Monday, and there was things in that file that explained why she wouldn't have gone home, that she hitchhiked because her family refused to give her a car or let her use a car, that she had been running away from home since she was in high school, that her father would hold her up against the wall by her neck to discipline her. She had told coworkers that her dad was abusive and would throw things at her, call her piggy, that she wasn't allowed to use the towels in the bathroom because they were only for the real family. Michele had a much more complicated background than anybody let on. And we found a note, a handwritten note in the DCI file of suspects, like a matrix, a chart. And her dad was a suspect. Ooh. He was home. His wife and one of his daughters was out of town, and he didn't report her missing. But they never told the defense. They never told Beeman about that.
Wow. Now, this guy been behind bars since 1980. How is his spirit? Does he still claim he's innocent?
Oh, yeah. I mean, 100%. He's been one of the easiest clients to represent because he has always, said, I'm sorry, I don't know why I did this. I don't know what happened. Here, my mom has all these papers, and so we would go to her house and copy everything she had. And the county attorney didn't have copies of the transcripts. We had to provide them. And then he said, well, they're annotated. They've got notes on them. I'm like, well, that's how we got them. We don't know if they're trial attorney notes, if they're family notes, but that's the only copies we have. I like to say he's hopeful, but I think he's very realistic. He's lost over and over again. He lost his habeas. He lost his prior to PCRs. And then we had all of this new evidence of innocence and the fact that the state hid it. I mean, the defense attorneys filed a motion asking for alternate suspects. State objected and said, nope, it's a fishing expedition. And the court said, yeah, you don't have to turn it over. And then we find this treasure trove of all of this information that pretty much everybody agrees was never turned over. And the district court still denied our motion. So now it's on appeal. People keep saying to him, why are you still here? Thought you were going home. We saw that article in the paper. They have all this new evidence that you didn't do it. Why are you still here? That's hard for him because he doesn't trust the court systems to do the right thing. We have worked really hard. We talked to Dr. Baker in Minnesota about the state of the body because there's science, right, about how your body decomposes, that there's different factors they look at to determine your time of death. And trying to prove that she wasn't dead on the 21st, that these people who saw her alive are corroborated by the science of her body. Dr. Baker, in his opinion, said that there's no way she was dead on the 21st, the way her body was found on the 26th, because one of the officers who responded to the scene said that there was rigor mortis in her limbs.
So you think she died after that?
Yeah, so rigor mortis doesn't usually last longer than 36 hours, depending on the temperature. Yeah. If it's frozen, obviously your body's going to stay rigid. If it's really, really hot out, you're going to enter rigor mortis and then come out of it really fast. And then your body's going to your skin's going to start to liquefy. There's a whole transformation that takes place, whether the skin becomes green, bloating, the skin starts to slip, things like that. Her body didn't have those things. So she does not show signs of having been dead for 5 days. maybe closer to 2. Hard to tell because there's no hourly weather data back then. There were a couple of days that hit 90 degrees, and yet if she had been out there in that 90-degree weather, you would expect more insect activity. You would have expected her to be bloated, things like that you don't see.
Didn't happen. Which means if that's the case, would even prove your case that Mr. Beeman is innocent. Why is that? Because he had concrete alibi on those days?
So everybody agreed that he broke his foot on the 22nd at Baker's Front Street Disco and then was in a cast and was with his girlfriend, the rest of that week. His other job had been like construction and roofing, and obviously he couldn't do that with a broken foot. There doesn't seem to be any theory under which he could have, met her and picked her up. The DCI file also revealed some interesting things about another alternate suspect that they had briefly mentioned, and they'd polygraphed him and he passed, so they no longer considered him a suspect. She thought that that was her boyfriend. They'd spent the night together. He doesn't have an alibi for that week either, lives alone. We don't know where she was staying or what she was doing, but that's not Beeman's burden. If you're going to say he killed her on the 21st, then you have to prove she was dead on the 21st.
So Erica Nichols Cook believed this guy's innocent.
I do.
And he already wasted 40 years of his life. How old is he now?
He's 63 now.
Oh, boy. He had kids before he went in?
Yeah, he had a couple of kids before he went in. They were all really young. He had a son that died earlier this year.
Oh, really? How is the victim family feels or thinking about after all these years? Are they still believe Beeman did it? Or are they still started questioning it?
There's some family in Muscatine, but they wouldn't talk to us. So I don't know. The legal proceedings we've been having have been about access to DNA testing and then the newly discovered evidence of the Brady violation. Brady versus Maryland is a 1963 case that says the prosecutors have to turn over any evidence that could be exculpatory. And then cases after that have explained that means alternate suspects. That means things that would impeach state witnesses. That's what we had here in Beeman, and they didn't turn it over. He should get a new trial.
What's the pushback from the state? Why they don't want to give it a new trial? The same issues we've seen over and over in other wrongful conviction cases? They just don't want to be wrong?
Yeah, I think they are very convinced that they got the right guy. They... after you throw away the DNA kit. They tried to claim that it's Beeman's fault the DNA kit is gone because he asked that his personal property be returned to his mother, and they returned his clothing. The prosecutor made that argument in court, that we don't have it. Miss Beeman has it. And so I got an affidavit from Bill's mom who said that they never gave me any swabs or kit or anything like that.
Yeah, I was about to say, you don't turn the evidence back to, do you?
Why? No. Why would you give the victim's samples, her blood? Why would you give that to the defendant's mother? And I don't know why the prosecutor thinks that's any better than we lost it. But one of the claims we have pending on his post-conviction right now is a due process claim that they destroyed the evidence. He's trying to say that they didn't destroy it, but it's gone. Or we thought maybe someone, accidentally put it in a wrong room or took it home or, something. But we deposed the sheriff's deputy at the time. He remembers taking it from the old jail to the new jail because they've built new facilities in 40 years. But it's not there.
When did you get involved with this case? When you came to Iowa?
Yeah, 2017-ish. We started reviewing it, I think.
Was that the first time this case got in wrongful conviction radar?
Yes. He'd had a prior post-conviction regarding the Heemstra decision about the felony murder rule. Because they never proved like a motive, for first-degree murder, right? They never proved premeditation or anything. They convicted him on the predicate felony of sex assault. And so today, under Heemstra, they wouldn't be able to go forward on a first-degree murder because they would not unless they could prove the sex assault and then the murder. So, because Heemstra basically said that whatever causes the murder can't be the assault. And so the stabbing or whatever, it would be a much more difficult case for the state to prove, and he'd be much more likely to, be a manslaughter or a murder too or something, not first degree, and he'd be parole eligible.
Which prison is he in now?
He's at the Iowa State Penitentiary.
What his family is thinking? You say his mom is still alive?
His mom is still alive. She stays positive, and she's always looking to help us. So, anytime she sees anything on the news, she gives us a call.
She's on.
But, COVID's been very hard. She hasn't been able to see Bill.
Yeah.
And they're just now starting some limited in-person visits. It's a drive from Muscatine to Fort Madison. His sisters are still around. One of the things that, we've learned with other exonerees, right, that, while freedom isn't free, being free isn't easy. My client, Bill Moore, who was acquitted, a couple years ago, he's the first one to tell you that it's really hard to come out. And he was in his 60s when he was released. He spent his 40s and 50s in prison for a murder he didn't commit, and cell phones and
everything new.
He worked on cars in the 90s.
Yeah.
And now he's like, I don't understand these cars. I can't do this. So I don't know. I believe that Bill will be vindicated. The law is not that complicated. Mm-hmm. Exculpatory evidence withheld. It shouldn't be that hard of a question. And he will have a lot of challenges when he does get out.
Yeah, because it's a different world from the 80s. These cases, when you guys are dealing with, it's not a cheap. How do you guys get supported?
Yeah, so
and grants?
We have kind of a mix. My salary is paid by the state public defender out of the public defender's budget, and so is my investigator. But we also partner with the Exoneration Project in Chicago, and we partner with the Midwest Innocence Project in Kansas City, and then we have our federal grants that have helped pay for different things. Dr. Baker donated his expert services on this case because he felt so strongly about it. In 1980, we didn't have a state medical examiner system in Iowa. And so you had a local coroner who was a family practice doctor. And so he went to the scene. He said that her whole body was in rigor. We don't even know if he actually touched the body, how close he got. And then, they hired some pathologists from the Quad Cities to come, and they did the autopsy at the funeral home. So the body wasn't even refrigerated. And so the next day when they did the autopsy, he's like, oh, well, she's badly decomposed. I'm like, but she'd been sitting at the funeral home since last night not in a cooler. So what effect did that have on decomp? And they didn't even consider that, in 1980.
Wow. What is your thought? You think you get this guy out?
I think we have to, one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
The Court of Appeals has the briefing on the Brady violation. We have a pending post-conviction alleging due process violation for destroying the evidence, actual innocence based on Dr. Baker and the alternate suspects and the timeline. We have another alternate suspect that we believe could be the murderer, that the cops didn't consider as a murderer. But since this time, he is a convicted sex offender. He just happened to be at the campground. He used to give her rides when she hitchhiked. There's some things there that make you question. I will say that every county is different. We elect a county attorney for each of our 99 counties, and they have a lot of control and set their policies. In Woodbury County, that office over there has agreed to do DNA testing with us on several cases. They've helped us look for evidence on another case, and we can't find it, but they let us go through their file. They had the police department search. They helped us, whereas in Muscatine County, we had to keep getting court orders to do it. So there's a lot of inconsistency. Iowa also has no uniform response to a FOIA or an open records request. The DCI, the state police, will not release any investigative reports. They say they're confidential forever. Some police departments will, and some will not. And you just never know. I send a letter and cross my fingers.
What can the public do to help the fight? Just to make sure we're helping you guys who are in the front line in this work, and also we help each other out. I mean, what can we do?
I think listening to this podcast is a great start. I think becoming aware of the issues, asking your candidates for office, asking your representatives. You know,
Yeah.
if you have a relationship with a law enforcement, asking them how they prevent wrongful convictions. What interrogation technique do you use? If you're selected for jury duty, I've never gotten to serve on a jury. I've always been disappointed.
Yeah.
Every time I'm picked, I don't make it through.
Oh, yeah, me neither. I think they just cross my name as soon as it comes up. We don't want him.
They find out what I do and like, nah, no thanks. You know, but taking that seriously, if you are lucky enough to be chosen for jury duty and
Yeah.
keeping an open mind, you know, just because someone's been arrested doesn't mean they're guilty.
Yeah.
Supporting transparency in government. We're really lacking in transparency. I'm always like, if you guys, you know, are so sure you got the right guy, why can't I see your file? What do you got to hide? And I've sat in a meeting with public safety where
Pause there for a second. That's very interesting what you just say. If you are certain you got the right guy, open up the file. When you arrest my guy, you told them, if you didn't do anything,
you got nothing to worry
you got
about.
nothing to be worried about.
Yep. Yep. Well, and I mean, I sat in this meeting where the commissioner of public safety said, well, it's our worst nightmare to have an innocent person in prison. And yet, every time I ask for records, I'm denied unless I get a court order or a subpoena. In order to get a court order or a subpoena, that means I have to be in court. And it's hard to get back into court with that information. So, you know, we've gotten, you know, lucky with Beeman because his mom kept everything. If she died 10 years ago and her house had just been, you know, emptied, we wouldn't have near what we have today to prove that they didn't know all this evidence. So I think really demanding, asking for the stories. There's not a lot of media coverage about wrongful convictions.
No.
You know, I did a hearing last week. Nobody knows. The Midwest Innocence Project has a great website, and you can sign up for a newsletter there. And we co-counsel on a lot of cases, so they will mention Iowa cases. I have a Facebook page that's just Erica Nichols Cook, attorney advocate, and I'll post stories about my cases there. Really keeping pressure on people is the only way. And, you know, I think, you know, supporting organizations that are doing important work in your community,
Yeah.
you know, whatever community that is, whether that's NAACP. In Des Moines has this great organization called the Supply Hive, where they are, you know, helping families. A lot of people who end up convicted for something they didn't do, sometimes it's because they were known to the police. They were what we like to call the usual suspect.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an unfortunate fact, right? But if you're a minority, you probably have had more contacts with the police than someone who's not. If you are a male, you've probably had more contacts than your female counterparts. And if you've had some misdemeanors and things like that, you're in the system. And so if you do get a rape victim looking through, like in Chicago, they used to look through yearbooks for familiar faces. Is the guy who raped you or shot at you in this book?
Gosh.
And Iowa, you know, does photo arrays, and they'll give you mugshots to look at. So if you know, even if you were arrested at a protest, right, you're now in the system, and someone could pick you. There's so much happening in our community where people are kind of pitted against each other. You're either back the blue or you're defund the police, and that's not neither one of those.
Neither one is those, yeah. I just don't want to know about it. I did not commit crime to go to prison, period. And on the flip side, I want the cops to arrest everybody who committing crimes out here.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
That was Erica Nichols Cook for you, the director of Iowa Division of Wrongful Conviction. Thanks for listening to Iowa Civil Rights History Podcast. Until next time, peace.